That's right. It's been a great morning so far. Still plenty to come. A couple of World War II veterans will be joining us here in the 9 o'clock hour. Senator Roger Marshall is going to be here then. Merrill Eisenhower is about 15 minutes away as we do commemorate 80 years to the day of D-Day here on KCMO live in Abilene. But, of course, the top story in Kansas City over the last 36 hours or so has been the Kansas legislature officially reaching out to the Kansas City Chiefs and saying, hey, come on over, come across the state line. And there was a poll that was done here by the group Coefficient, and the guy who runs the operation, Ryan Munce, is joining us on KCMO Talk Radio, 95.7 FM. Ryan, good morning. It's good to have you here. We appreciate your time on KCMO.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's just start off, Ryan, with you putting together this poll. It was first obtained by Fox 4 News here in Kansas City. What did you learn about where Kansans stand on the Chiefs potentially coming across the state line?
Sure. So really, the one clear headline in all the data is that it's overwhelmingly popular, which is frankly not hard to believe. Chiefs are beloved in the region and really throughout the Midwest, and the data really does reflect that. The support for the program, kind of the concept, the proposal is strong majorities really across the state, across demographics, even across the partisan spectrum. It really was popular, and we dug into it as much as we could to kind of get the real attitude, the real opinion, with different kind of levels of nuance and detail, and it was pretty consistent.
So is this a poll that you commissioned, is it statewide, or was it unique and just done in the Kansas City metro area on the Kansas side of the state line?
Sure. So it was actually a really comprehensive study that included 24 unique studies within one larger. It was a statewide study, a primary voter study, and then we did specific polling within 11 Senate districts and 10 House legislative districts, kind of a cluster of districts in the Johnson and Wyandotte County areas, several around Wichita, and then a few kind of sampled throughout the western half of the state as well, just so we could be really confident that we could zero in and with confidence really understand how voters and taxpayers were thinking about this concept really across the state. But of course, focus on Johnson County was important as well. So we have good usable samples really with a number of different views.
You know, we know people who have called the show who said, I assume it was your poll that they had been reached out to about. But the way that you frame the question here in the polling, the Kansas legislature is considering a proposal that would bring the Chiefs to Kansas and keep them in the area. Do you support the Chiefs leaving Missouri and moving to Kansas? There was no mention about, at least as I read it here, star bonds, how those work, whether or not the taxpayer is on the hook. Does that change the equation at all? Have you had that question answered as to how residents feel based on whether or not there are any tax dollars involved?
Sure. So yeah, the study as a whole, the way we design these types of instruments, they will typically start with just a straight kind of a baseline question like the one you mentioned, just to get people's opinion about the concept before we go into the details. It's easy to say, hey, do you want this new shiny object with no costs, no mechanics behind it? And you'll typically get a pretty overwhelmingly positive response. And then we do a series of questions that are both informative questions about how this thing could come to be, about the cost, the funding mechanism. We do some negative messaging, some positive messaging. And then we ask again what we call kind of an informed support question at the end of the instrument. And it was the positive support really persisted all the way through. At the very end of the instrument, we ask again, with some additional detail, do you specifically support the Star Bond funding mechanism to bring the Chiefs to Kansas City? And at that point, the data was 56% saying yes, only 27% saying no, almost 30% or 30% gap between the yeses and the nos, 2-to-1 support overall. And that was the that was after the full kind of set of detail and information about how this thing can come to be.
And I've got to imagine, Ryan, that, I believe in this poll, at least some of the people who called into the show said that part of this poll included whether or not you would support your state representative or your state senator being supportive of this piece of legislation, and how likely it is you would vote for them again based on whether or not they support it. And I imagine that was in part done to see if these politicians would be at risk based on how they feel regarding this legislation. Was that the purpose of that part of the poll?
For the most part, yeah. We will, anytime we work on a legislative initiative or a ballot initiative, we always want to get a sense for how the public will react one way or the other, depending on support. And sometimes we jokingly will call it a political retribution or a punishment kind of question. How bad will you punish your representatives? And in this case, it was kind of interesting. It was pretty stable across the state. About 37% statewide said that they would be less likely to vote for their representative in the state house or Senate if they didn't support the program. But that number really spiked right around Johnson and Wyandotte County. Those folks that I think would benefit the most, or at least in their mind, they benefit the most. And interestingly, independent voters, those that are a little bit less politically engaged, less partisan, less really focused on some of the national, political debates, they were the ones that were the most likely. About 65% of those independent voters in the eastern side of the state were the most likely to say that they would, in fact, not vote for their representatives if they didn't support it.
Interesting. Well, Ryan, thank you for sharing the insights on that poll here on KCMO. We will definitely be in touch, because something tells me this conversation is not going anywhere, and you may be involved with a few more polls on this front. So thank you so much for the time. We appreciate it.
There's a good chance. Yep, talk to you soon.
Thanks so much. Ryan Munce on KCMO, Coefficient Polling Group, commissioned that poll that showed Kansans overwhelmingly are supportive of the Chiefs coming to the other side of the state line. But the devil, as always with these deals, are in the details, and that remains to be seen.